So this topic of profiles of some fantastic and extraordinary Rashaim, I did think to give an interesting angle anyway on Paro Rasha. It's a bit of a process. Bear with me because there's some interesting insights we can derive from it. Am Yisrael as a nation, going into now Purim and 4 weeks later exactly Pesach, Am Yisrael as a nation barely began to exist. In other words, we had Yaakov Avinu and his 13 children. For reasons of famine and parnasah, they had to move down to Egypt. There wasn't really a nation to speak of. In other words, we didn't have a national history. By the time the population started to explode, started to grow, it's not like you could point back and say, oh, the Jewish nation that did this or that didn't do that, they participated in this or they avoided that, they promoted this and they suppressed or repressed that. Basically, it was a very small family, relatively small family that comes to Egypt. They start to make a decent parnasah, they get married, they have children, and all of a sudden, not long after the population starts to boom, Paro comes up with a very bizarre concept. What's the concept? Anti-Semitism. Probably one of the original inventors, creators of anti-Semitism. If there's a copyright on it, Paro definitely deserves at least a certain degree of the equity. Lavan HaRasha, you can say that his fight with Avraham Avinu was a personal thing. I don't know, you promised this, you gave me that, you're supposed to work like this, ended up working like that. He certainly couldn't say that it was because of Yitzchak or Avraham. There was nothing in his family's history that should cause him to be this way. If Avraham was fighting with Nimrod, you can say also it was a personal vendetta. So, okay, I don't get along with you, you don't get along with me. We stand for different things, we promote different concepts. In the industry of ideas, you and I are competitors. Yitzchak Avinu doesn't get along with Avimelech, Melech Perishtim. Okay. We'll even see that he didn't get along with Ishmael. They probably didn't have that much contact to begin with. But little dispute, little fight, and they work it out. Paro cannot be speaking out of personal experience with too many Jews. I'll prove it to you. The very beginning of Chumash Shemot, we see that Bnei Israel became very numerous. Right? Bnei Israel paru vayishratzu vayrabu va'atzmu bim'od me'od v'timaleh ha'aretz otam. They become fruitful and they multiply. And so what? And so what did they do? Who did they kill? There wasn't enough food in all of Egypt to feed both the Jews and the Goyim. This is after Yosef. This is after Mitzrayim became a massive empire. They controlled most of the known world at the time. What's the really big deal? What did the Jews actually do? So Paro becomes the initiator of hating Jews because they're Jewish, of despising the people, not for anything they did, not for anything they could do or they should have done or they should do, just because they're Jewish. These people, I don't like them, and I want other people to hate them as well. And so how does hatred come from nowhere? Right? One spoke about this. There's a beautiful midrash on Shir HaShirim. It's on a very funny pasuk in the 8th perek. Ki azah chama v'tahava qashach yish'ol qina v'shafah rishpei esh al hevet yam. So ki azah chama v'tahava, love is as fierce as death. They have a lot in common, right? Love and love, you would think, it's inspiring. It gives you koach. It makes you want to live. It makes you want to live longer. It makes your life that much more interesting and motivating. And death is death. Not all that much you can say about it. It doesn't really motivate you to do all that much. So the Midrash says, after a number of other opinions and possibilities, that love and death are basically both super intense emotions that can only be expressed out of a very strong personal feeling towards something, either a strong like or a strong dislike. So Midrash says in its own language, so strong was the love that HaKadosh Baruch Hu had for Am Yisrael that when they went off the derech and they started doing crazy things, worshipping idols, etc., that this love turned into an intense, almost hatred. In other words, that Hashem was ready even for us to be killed. It says, B'chochotai, it's what it says in Kitavo, Kasher sas Hashem Elokecha lehativ lach, Keresis Hashem Elokecha l'hara lecha. Just like Hashem was happy to give us reward when doing the right thing, He was equally happy. And the Pasuk says literally, equally, just as happy to give us punishments. So Rav Sabato once explained like this. In order to feel really strongly about something, you really have to know it. You can't expect me to hate someone I never met. You can try, you can talk it up, but at the end of the day, if I don't know, I don't care. I'm indifferent. I'm neutral. In order to really like someone, you have to get to know them, you have to have experiences with them, you have to see them in a few different angles, and the better you know them, the more strongly you're going to feel about them, hopefully positively. Is it possible to really hate someone you don't know? To have really strong negative feelings about something you've never experienced, never encountered? Practically impossible. But neutrality is something else. Neutrality is typically what results from having no experience, from being distant, from being detached. No kesher, I don't know. I don't know how many Jews Paro interacted with, if indeed it is the same Paro since the time of Yosef. But he comes up with this crazy idea and he says, this Jewish nation is reproducing quickly, maybe even too quickly. Right? הנה המסרבר רצו ממנו. הווה נתחכמה לו, פן ירבה, והיה כי תקרן המלחמה ונוסף גם רצוננו, ונלחם בנו ועלה מן הארץ. What we need to do is to outsmart the Jews. Outsmart them. Why? What were they conspiring to do? You found them, you caught them in the middle of a plan, they have spies, they're conspiring against you. No, let's do something, let's outsmart them, let's beat them to the punch. Probably this is what they want to do, and we'll beat them on this. So where did this suspicion come from? Based on what? What evidence do we have anywhere that the Jews were going to do anything that was detrimental to the Egyptians? Adrabah. The Jews for the Egyptians were the biggest bracha that ever came to them. If it weren't for Yosef, who by the way was Jewish, like it or not, if it wasn't for Yosef, the entire country and all the surrounding countries would have died in the famine. And instead of appreciating and respecting what they contributed to you, you start thinking, well, they're powerful, maybe they're too powerful, because what had happened if, in the event that we have a war, and then what happens if they take the side of our enemies over us, and then what happens if we lose that war, and then what? Then the Jews would end up leaving the country. I mean, if you don't like them, the end of the pasuk doesn't make sense in the context of the beginning. You don't like the Jews, kick them out. Make it easy. Get rid of them now. Mass deportation. Solve the problem. No, you like them, you like to enjoy the bracha, you just don't want them getting up and leaving the country because you need them there. So what do? So you come up with a plan. What's the plan? Let's engage in some agitprop, some propaganda. We can convince the people to hate them, and this way if we torture them and if we punish them, it becomes normal for them. There's a reason, there's an explanation, there's a logic, there's a rationale. And he creates this plot literally out of nothing, out of thin air. A nation that did nothing but good for you, and you return nothing but bad in return. No respect, no appreciation, on the contrary. Theories of conspiracy, right? Presumptions on your part. So if a foreign country invaded Egypt, the Jews wouldn't appreciate that Egypt gave them a place to live? How do you jump to the conclusion they would automatically be with somebody else? Very interestingly, you'll find that throughout even modern history, propaganda and anti-Semitism is huge. Very, very rare that someone actually interacts with a Jew and then comes out and says, oh, I don't really like that guy, or I can't stand that girl, and therefore I hate the rest of this nation too. It'd be a crazy thing to say even if they said it. More often than not, people are fed some kind of a story, maybe they want to believe it, and they come up with this crazy rationale where because this story, therefore I hate all the Jews. As if that's a logical thing to deduce. So it's funny how much of the world, before there was an Israel, they just accused the Jews of being conspirators. If the Jews were involved in different industries, let's say, for example, changing money because it was the only thing they were allowed to do. They couldn't own land in many countries in Europe. So they're rendering you a service, right? They're actually doing you a favor. If they were money lenders, because the Goyim wouldn't allow for non-Jews to lend each other money. So the Jews had to have some kind of parnasah, they had to have some kind of industry they can live off of. And then you go ahead and you get upset at them for lending you money. Oh, we had that recently in the collapse of the mortgage market, where banks lend money that you didn't even deserve and you couldn't pay back, and then you turn around and you hate the bank for lending you the money, as if the bank did something wrong. So the real bizarre aspect to this entire concept of anti-Semitism is that it was made up out of nothing, literally out of the blue. And Paro Rasha was so successful in getting the people's support and started this whole campaign against the Jews that he managed to motivate them to torture the Jews, to motivate them to kill Jews, to kill babies, to whip people, to do terrible things that you would think your average person isn't normally able to do. And in order to get people to make that step, there has to be some kind of compelling logic, a compelling rationale. How can you get someone to behave like an animal? You have to convince them that they're fighting animals. How can you get someone to hate somebody for absolutely no reason? Give them a reason to hate. Find the hate plug in their brain and put something in it that gets them all agitated and excited, even if it's over nothing. Give them a target because they probably have some innate hatred anyway. Just help them focus their hatred on this. And it's all a sandcastle. I mean, it's a house of cards based on no evidence. Then, once they start beating the Jews, they start torturing them, and they have logic and rationale and explanation for it, the rest of it is pretty much history. And so the Russian communists did this. Yimach Shmam Zichram, the Nazis, their propaganda machine was a very well-oiled one. And you find throughout the Arab world as well that propaganda is a very, very popular concept. It's very easy to control the brains of people with a very minimal appetite for the truth by giving them just a little bit of hatred, which is all you really want to hear in the first place, and then mobilizing them, getting them to act on it. But it begins with nothing. Incidentally, this is a very profoundly Kabbalistic concept on the whole battle between good and evil. Language of the Zohar Kadosh is that Yetzer Hara has no koach, has no strength, no roots, no legitimacy, nothing. There's no justification whatsoever for any Avirah. They all come from nowhere and they all lead nowhere. In fact, how do we often refer to Yetzer Hara and to these material pursuits of Olam Hazeh? You'll find very often expressions like Hevel, Rik, hot air, it's nothing, it's emptiness, it's a void, it's a vacuum. These desires that come from nowhere and that inspire you to do things that are detrimental and damaging even to the things that you have now. Why would I risk what I have now? We were talking before about this mayor. Mayor got caught in some kind of a scandal, whatever, some sexual affair. It was the first time in human history that there was someone in a position of political power. He got caught in a sex scandal. So, in this groundbreaking case, the guy was married, he had a family, and he gets caught with this girl. Why would you sacrifice your whole family and your whole career over, half an hour of fun with whatever situation? It doesn't make sense. Zohar explains like this. Yetzer Hara actually has nothing. Nothing. No bank account, no checks, no credit cards, nothing. No koach. Where does he get his koach? He steals it. Where does he steal it from? He steals it from Yetzer Hara. There is no strength, there is no power behind the whole industry of evil. Its legitimacy and its strength and its tools, its utensils are actually stolen from Yetzer Hara. That's it, simple enough. So when I say that it has nothing, that's actually misleading, because Yetzer Hara leads you to Avirot with nothing. What's nothing? With a void, with an appetite, with a desire, with some kind of an instinct. So every one of us gets hungry every so often. So Yetzer Hara jumps in when you're hungry. When you're satiated and everything's okay, you don't think so much about eating non-kosher food. It's only when I'm hungry I say, you know what? I'm really interested in eating something. I could eat something simple and I can satiate my hunger, or I could eat something tasty and fancy and maybe even not so permissible would be great. That satisfies two kinds of hunger. One is the physical hunger, and one's the spiritual appetite for destruction, filling ourselves with things that are forbidden for us to eat. So most forms of evil begin with emptiness, with some kind of a void, real or imaginary, And this is how you get motivated to go from point A to point B and fill that void. So it's not for nothing that Paro invents anti-Semitism. There is no legitimate grounds or basis for anti-Semitism. The facts are, it's all made up out of thin air. People who have an appetite for hatred, people who have an appetite for these things, very easily get drawn into it. It's a very easy story to sell. The Jews are living in a foreign country, so on the one hand they're disadvantaged. What were the Jews going to do to Egypt? They were going to take over the whole country. How? With what army exactly? They weren't trained. They didn't have a military. It's not like they were going to mount a whole campaign to unseat, to dethrone Paro. But you can use this against them in order to oppress them, where they otherwise could have lived there perfectly peacefully. So, for example, the fact that they come from a foreign country and they speak a different language makes them suspect in my mind. Why does it make them suspect? Because if they wanted to, they could speak to each other in code. In fact, the Midrash tells us that one of the three things the Jews didn't change, and one of the reasons we were redeemed, is they didn't change the language they spoke. So it's nice, they're true to their heritage, they're true to their roots. Maybe one day they want to go back to Eretz Yisrael. Maybe that's actually a good thing. And here Paro turns it into something negative, and he says, you know what? The fact that they still speak Hebrew means they don't want to integrate with us. They don't want to integrate with us. Okay, so it's a bad thing or it's a good thing? Well, in the event that we're attacked by some other country, they're going to jump on the bandwagon and what? Leave the country? And if you want them to leave, tell them to leave now. No, I don't want them to leave because they're productive. So I want them to stay. They're different. They need to be hated. So how far is this from Haman, by the way? It's a funny coincidence. The Quran actually holds that Haman was an advisor to Paro. It doesn't hold that Jesus was a brother to Moshe, Miriam, and Aharon, because they have the Miriam is in Moshe and Aharon's sister. They believe that it was the same Miriam as his whatever. They're 2 minutes. They're quick cameo in a shiva. But the idea, the concept that the hatred needs to be manufactured, based a little bit on some kind of truth, but then you're just playing on people's desire, their appetite for destruction, is actually the very same thing that Haman copied over in the story of the Megillah. How does it work? Simple. What were the Jews doing in the Babylonian, later Persian Empire? Were they living especially spiritual lives?
Partying.
I mean, they were partying. They were somewhat secular. Just like in Egypt, where they were overwhelmingly assimilated. And what's Haman's comment on this entire situation? What's the fat that he throws into the fire? He gets the whole thing started how? Says to Ahasuerus, after he gets prominence, after he gets power, after he gets decision-making authority, Ahasuerus gives him this signet ring. Yeshno am echad mefuzar u'mufrad b'chol midot hamelech. Datahem shonot midat hamelech, v'hamelech ein shoel hanicham. There's this nation that is scattered, that is disunified in all these 127 nations, that the countries that the Ahasuerus is the emperor over. Their religion is different from the religion of the other nations in the world. How do you explain this pasuk? What does that mean? Literally. En shoel hanicham.
It's not worth it for him
to do what?
Keep them.
Laniach. What does laniach mean in Hebrew?
Leave deposit.
Okay, it's not even worth it for you to leave them alone. But leaving them alone doesn't cost me anything. You're telling me that there's something in my empire and I should get rid of it. Get rid of it costs money.
But Shuvah is also, it's not about, it's not fair, something like being equal. Shuvah is like Shaveh, no, it's not the same word.
Yeah, the same etymology.
So it's almost like you wouldn't be even if you let them stay like that. You have to do something to be even.
It was exactly what however you define the etymology of it, or the definition of it, that's the point that he's making. Haman is selling this ridiculous plan. Haman is saying, classic.
The woman can make home, right?
I get this all the time. All the time. How long have you been sitting here talking to this guy? Oh, he's been here for like an hour and a half. You didn't take anything out. Well,
no, he's doing it on his own. I told him not to.
So, there's like you.
You should tell me I'm hungry and we should
So Haman is trying to sell an interesting program. You have these Jews, they live in 127 different countries, right? They're scattered, they're disunified, they're disjoint. Basically, what are we saying? They're assimilated. They're assimilated. They're basically just like everyone else. In this case, they're not speaking Hebrew. Their dress probably wasn't any different from the way anyone else dressed. Maybe they were circumcising, maybe they weren't, but at this point, I mean, how much does it really mean? We know for a fact that Am Yisrael was on a very low spiritual level at this particular time. And Haman comes out of nowhere, literally out of thin air. And his response is, well, there's this nation that technically has a different religion. They don't even observe it. What do you want from them? Yeah, but in theory, if they wanted to observe their religion, they would be different from everyone else. So for what? For the 1 out of 10 Jews maybe who was observant at the time? You're going to make a mess and a whole military campaign to eradicate them? Well, they're scattered, they're disunified. If they don't like each other so much, obviously we shouldn't like them anymore, right? That doesn't make any sense. It's not even worth your time or your effort to leave them alone. But leaving them alone doesn't require time or effort. I just leave them to their own devices. I didn't ask them to do anything. They never bothered me and I never bothered them. What do you want me to do? Leaving them alone, basically, he's saying, is going to be more of a headache or more of a problem than just eradicating them. Like maybe this nation is disunified, maybe they're going to cause disunity amongst the other nations that are part of your empire. Oh, we're back with Paro. What happens if the empire is attacked? What happens if the Jews, at least in some countries, happen to side with the attackers, not with us? God forbid this could be a danger to the whole empire. Yeah, that's right. A small handful of Jews are going to take down the whole empire. I mean, really? And that's what Haman is selling. But this is the nature of hatred in general. It comes from nowhere. It leads you somewhere even worse. It's all based on smoke and mirrors and suspicions and theories of conspiracy. Maybe this, maybe that. What if this, then that? And if that's the case, that's terrible. Who told you it's the case? Calm down, relax. Not the end of the world. The nature of anti-Semitism, unfortunately, really epitomizes this. Now, Haman, as a descendant of Amalek, has this hatred in him that no matter what the Jews do, it's never going to be enough. It's always going to be worth his while to pursue them and to kill them. So he's trying to convince Ahasuerus to let him do what he really has deep down inside, which is this pursuit. There's a void in his nefesh. There's something missing in his life if Jews are there. And he says it. He says it, but this whole thing starts over what? Over Mordechai refusing to bow down? Really? So let's say, for argument's sake, there were 10 million Jews at the time. 1 out of 10 million is really not that bad a rate. If you want to call Mordechai a total failure. Haman couldn't get him to bow down. 1 out of 10 million is negligible. How negligible? Like 1% of 1% of 1% of 1% negligible. And Haman doesn't get this. He can't digest it. And he himself says, he uses the same term, which is really fascinating. Goes back home and he talks to his wife. He says, "Kol ze inenu sheweli." Nothing that I have is really worth it to me. When I see Mordechai, who won't bow down, who won't, revere me the way I want to be revered. So what he's communicating to Ahasuerus is basically, my life is worthless unless I have everything. He's a psycho OCD perfectionist, Haman, which is interesting because it bears a lot of resemblance to Germans. Of course, not all Germans are Nazis, but enough of them were to kill lots of people. So, my life is absolutely worthless. All I see is the emptiness. All I see is the cup that's half empty, not the cup that's half full. And therefore, all I can focus on is what's missing. It breeds negativity. And this negativity, the only way for me to resolve it is by killing all of them. So he went from everything being 99.99999% perfect to being an absolute disaster until he gets everything that he wants. Such is the nature of Amalek in our nefesh as well. Very often, you should know, the Akadosh talks about this too, this aspect of Amalek, this angle of Amalek. So whether or not we have individuals we can identify as Amalek, I think today it's getting easier and easier, but with time we should benefit from more clarity on the topic. But as you see people whose lives are pure evil and who live a life of evil, it's one thing to say, "Oh, I wish I were there. I could kill this person, fulfill the mitzvah of erasing the memory of Amalek." there's an Amaliki part to every single nefesh. All of us suffer from this at some point or another, where these little concepts become making a mountain out of a molehill, is how we say this in English. I'll give you a funny example of this. It's not out of hatred, but it's a funny example of how the imagination works on us when it comes to Yetzer Hara. Husband got caught up in traffic. He's on this annoying phone call that he can't get off. 5, 10, 15, 20 minutes late. And his wife's imagination starts to go to work. They killed him. He was kidnapped. I'm sure he was killed. And, or he's in a horrible car accident. They're never going to find the body. This is a disaster. Your mother might have thought this about you if you were ever late coming home from a party or coming home from an engagement, whatever it is. And right away, the worst possible scenarios, not even scenarios that aren't even real. They don't exist. Like if somebody wanted to kill me, I don't think they would have caught me off the highway and taken me. There's easier ways to do it. But the imagination starts to run off in sorts of crazy directions. Oh my God, is he talking to someone? Is it a woman? I'll kill him. Annoying phone call, couldn't get off. I would have called you as soon as it was over. Sometimes, you're not paying attention to the clock. But this is the nature of Yetzer Hara in general. There's a little bit of a void, a little bit of a gap, some kind of like missing information. And you can tell the state of your own neshama by how you feel that. So Chazal tells us, for example, in Pirkei Avot, that we have a mitzvah to judge people favorably. Harken back to the Ramban that we quoted, was it last week? Each and every mitzvah in the Torah refers or relates only to something that we instinctively don't want to do and need to be told you have to do this because it's an obligation, or things that we're instinctively inspired not to do. Things that we're instinctively inspired to do, and we need to be told not to by HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Naturally, I would eat anything I see when I'm hungry. Okay, but you can't. Don't eat people, don't eat pork, don't eat rabbits, a whole bunch of things that we're not allowed to eat. Don't. Normally, naturally, I'd eat whatever I could. Hashem told me not to, so I need to work on my nefesh and not do this. I'm naturally not really inclined to give honor and respect to my parents. I'd rather fight with them and call them names because we have conflict. And it becomes very difficult, yet I'm obligated to overcome this childish instinct to rebel against my parents, to actually exhibit, manifest respect and appreciation and understanding of their investment in me and maybe their life experiences, etc. So every single mitzvah in the Torah relates to something that you would naturally do or not do, and it comes to correct that, help bring you closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. If Chazal tell us that we have a mitzvah to judge people favorably, it's a nice way of saying, left to our own devices, we probably wouldn't do that. In other words, wherever you find a gap or a void or like an absence of information, our natural tendency is almost to fill it with something negative. This little Amaleki gene that we still have that we don't know. So sometimes you get very worked up about, new situations. Oh my God, I'm starting a new job and they're all going to hate me. I'm going to do something wrong. What is he thinking? What is she thinking? And you go through it once or twice. See, people are normal. There's no reason to suspect, and you kind of move on. So it's very interesting how this is manifest even in the mitzvot of Purim itself. In other words, we have an obligation, and this the Arizal points out poetically how the beginning of the Megillah is resolved by the end, where the same nation that was disunified and that was disjoint, they didn't get along, they couldn't stand each other, and so if they don't like each other, why should we like them? Why should we tolerate them? And so what do we have? We have a mitzvah of making a seudah. And how fun is it to eat alone? Probably it's more of a communal kind of thing. You invite friends, family. We have a mitzvah of matanot le'avyonim. Remember there are people less fortunate than yourself. Care about them. Apparently we didn't care all that much in the beginning, but hopefully by the end we got that message. The message came across. And mishloach manot ish l're'ehu. We should send gifts to each other, make each other happy. We don't have this mitzvah in Pesach. There's such mitzvah in Rosh Hashanah, even Yom Kippur, the highest, holiest day of the year. I have no mitzvah to send people food. In fact, it's probably insulting. So why is it when it comes to Purim, all of a sudden I have a mitzvah to do nice things for other people, like give them charity, give them food, and maybe even invite them to a seudah? Because we have this deficiency, a little bit of a defect when it comes to our ability to judge people favorably. And this is the ultimate antidote to Amalek. So hatred begins with this void, with this an appetite, an emptiness that kind of draws you into it and say, hey, I don't have too much information, but what if, or this, or what if that, or maybe in such a case, such a... And you go on and you build a whole, again, a house of cards, justifying and explaining why this person needs to be punished, that one needs to be killed, this one should be tortured. People do the worst things in the world because of such crazy ideologies. Haman copies this Paro propaganda concept, and he propagates hatred and preaches genocide based on the same concept. And our response to this is judge people favorably. Where you don't have information, you need to make a positive effort to fill in good information. I never met this guy before. I'm sure he's a lovely guy. Never saw this woman before in my life, but I'm sure she's great. I've got tons to learn from her. In fact, just a matter of time before I figure out what it is. Very positive way of looking at the world. The Ramban writes something very similar in Igerat Ramban. This is basically his will to his children, where he says that the worst midah you can possibly have is pride, anger. They're kind of related. And he says, therefore, when you encounter someone, you need to assume, especially if you see them doing something that you think isn't necessarily proper or appropriate, you need to assume one of two things. You're naturally going to think, if someone's doing something that I perceive to be a mistake, that I'm better or smarter, etc., not as dumb or ignorant. So he says, maybe this person just doesn't know. Someone's ignorant of halakha. So if that's the case, whatever he or she is doing probably stems from ignorance. When you make mistakes, if you're so smart, they're on purpose. You're intentionally ignoring halakha, you're doing against what you know better, against better judgment, and doing it anyway. And he says, humble yourself. This person probably is wiser than me, maybe gives more tzedakah, even if he or she doesn't have as much knowledge, probably they're more materially helpful to other people, maybe if not necessarily spiritually. But it's a very positive exercise to go through. First of all, don't overestimate your own value. We all do this all the time. Second of all, when you do come across something unknown or unfamiliar, flex that muscle, think positive. Here's someone good, here's someone with good midot, even if not perfect, I'm not perfect either. Definitely have what to learn from him or her. Let's give him or her a chance, make sure that we can, start off on the right foot. You approach new acquaintances with suspicions, you're probably going to elicit negative responses, or at least colder ones, and some of your self-fulfilling negative prophecies might actually come true. If I'm cold and I'm a little bit distant, then what should you expect? The way you respond to people or react to them is how they react to you. So hatred tends to breed hatred, mistrust tends to breed mistrust. The same is true of positive midot too. Think positively, smile, you'll get a smile back. Give people the benefit of the doubt. Every so often you're going to need it too. Not a bad habit to be in. Tov, shalom. Have a great night. Hopefully a very positive month of Adar. A month in which we can actually turn things inside out. We changed our mazal.
When's Rosh Chodesh?
Hopefully
Where's the name?
Wednesday.